The original Game Boy is one of the most influential pieces of video game history. It was twice as fast as the NES, and it outsold both the Atari Lynx and Sega Genesis combined. The Game Boy also had extremely high build quality, as one even survived a bombing barrage during the Gulf War and now sits at the New York Nintendo store. So it's no surprise that a lot of companies were quick to publish games for this popular handheld, meaning there's a plethora of titles that you definitely need in your collection. With the first one being Cosmo Tank. This game's a 2D shooter that also switches into 3D during different levels. In the story mode, you take control of an armored vehicle that's tasked with defeating aliens and destroying 5 life cores. There's also 2 other game modes, with the first one being a training mode and the other one being a versus mode. Personally, I thought the versus mode was super cool, as it allows you to use the Game Link cable and compete against a friend. Overall, Cosmo Tank is a very unique title on the Game Boy, and it has a ranking system making it very replayable. So if you're in the market for a shoot 'em up on the Game Boy, definitely consider this one. And next up is Wario Land 2. Now this game did get a re-release on the Game Boy Color, but I'm going to focus on the original because it showed off how powerful the Game Boy was. In Wario Land 2, you are chasing Captain Syrup, who has stolen all of Wario's treasure. This leads to Wario running through various lands and defeating a wide array of bosses. There's also a handful of puzzles and mini-games present on each stage, along with 5 different possible endings. Wario is able to perform a side dash, and he also gets to transform in certain areas when attacked by different enemies. It's just super impressive how much content is packed into this one game, and to this day it still holds up. So if you're wanting a fun platformer with a ton of content, consider getting Wario Land 2. And up next is DarkWing Duck. Most people know about the NES game, but not many people talk about the Game Boy one. In DarkWing Duck, you have to defeat 6 areas where each one contains a boss. The gameplay is very similar to games like Mega Man, and it will require you to platform around while changing weapons. I enjoy the different adapters that alter the standard gas gun, and also the capability which allows for deflecting projectiles. Overall, there isn't too much to say about this game, as it's really just a crossover of Mega Man and DuckTales, but it's a ton of fun, and it does a great job at converting the beloved NES version into a handheld form. So if you're wanting a classic platformer, DarkWing Duck is one to try. And coming in next is Tailgator. This game is one of the few titles I would consider a hidden gem because not many people know about it. Tailgator looks like a basic side scroller, but it's far from that. In Tailgator, stages are split up into similar areas where you get to choose which ones you want to approach first. You've got a tail attack which can be upgraded along with your health. There's a ton of hidden collectibles and miscellaneous upgrades that add a lot to the replayability. Also, the bosses are very well done, and they definitely get harder the farther you get into the game. So if you're in the market for a challenging platformer that changes things up a bit, I would recommend trying out Tailgator. And next is Batman Return of the Joker. When this game released, many expected a mediocre port of the NES version, but instead they received a lot more than that, almost feeling kind of like a sequel. The entire game features great graphics and music, along with very responsive controls. In terms of the gameplay, it's a semi-challenging 2D platformer that gives you the ability to punch, hang off walls, and grapple hook around. The entire game is not very long, but it's challenging enough to keep you coming back. Also, the bosses are half decent, with my favorite definitely being Foul Ball. So if you're a fan of Batman games or you just want a quick platformer, Batman Returns is one to check out. And up next, DuckTales 1. This is another Mega Man type platformer, but it's still very different in its own right. The core premise of DuckTales is that you play as Scrooge McDuck, who is capable of jumping and using his cane as either a weapon or a pogo stick. You get to choose between 5 available levels, but unlike Mega Man, the order really doesn't matter here. Each level will have you platforming while collecting money to eventually defeat the end boss. Although what definitely makes this game a little different is that the level layout is not a simple straight line. There are fast roads to the boss rooms, which mean if you don't want to explore certain parts of a level, you don't have to. So if you're looking for a solid platformer to take on the go, I say DuckTales still holds up. And coming in next, Bubble Ghost. This is a very unique puzzle game that faded into obscurity after being very popular on the Amiga. In Bubble Ghost, you play as a small ghost whose entire goal is to guide a bubble through levels without popping it. There are plenty of obstacles that will try to hit your bubble, but your ghost is capable of preventing that by interacting with them. Also, the game has a nice mechanic where when the ghost is near the bubble, he becomes stuck in its gravity, making it easier to maneuver the bubble around. It's a simple game, but it's laid out in such a way that keeps it from getting stale. On a side note, this game's getting a remaster on Steam, which is cool to see as the series is now over 30 years old, so if you're looking for a noteworthy puzzle game in the meantime, you should consider checking out Bubble Ghost. And next is James Bond 007. For many, a James Bond title on the Game Boy might not sound that appealing, but this one's definitely a little different from other action games. In 007, you have to stop a nuclear holocaust from occurring, which means you'll be going against some classic Bond villains within different levels. The gameplay itself is a top-down perspective where the player gets to control Bond and perform karate moves along with handle different weapons. There's a total of 11 different levels as well as various minigames such as Baccarat and Blackjack. James Bond 007 is all in all a decent Game Boy release that many at the time compared to games like Link's Awakening. So if you're in the market for an action-adventure title on the Game Boy, definitely try out James Bond 007. And the next game is Picross 2. This game was only released in Japan, but that doesn't matter because there's not much dialogue at all. Instead, you walk around as Mario while solving different puzzles. These puzzles are logic-based nonograms where the numbers at the end of each column and row display what needs to be filled in. And while that might sound sort of boring, what makes this game worth playing is after the first world, the game really starts to ramp it up. This is because upon entering the second world, Wario appears, making it so you are no longer playing Mario Picross, but now you're playing Wario Picross, which is a lot harder as now there's a time limit in place along with a few gimmicks to make things extra challenging. One of the added challenges I enjoyed was that in Wario Picross, you aren't told when a mistake has been made until you get stuck or you finish that level. This adds a lot of tension to the gameplay, especially when there's a ticking time limit as well. Overall, Picross 2 is an excellent puzzle game that everyone should at least try once, so if you're wanting something a little bit different, definitely consider getting this one. And lastly, we have Gargoyles Quest. In this game, you play as Firebrand, who is the main enemy in the Ghosts and Goblins series. The storyline is that you are traversing the ghoul realm to defeat a final boss in hopes of protecting the ghouls. This puts you in the shoes of Firebrand, who switches between two gameplay styles, with the first one being an overhead view along with action platforming segments that usually feature bosses at the end of them. As you progress further in the game, you'll receive upgrades that make it so you can fly higher as well as hover for longer periods of time. The flying mechanic really adds depth to the game, and the platforming action segments definitely make this title stand out, so if you're looking for a different kind of platformer with minor RPG elements, definitely check out Gargoyles Quest. And well, that's it for now. Down the road I might make another Game Boy video, although it's pretty unlikely as it seems like most people are not that into the handheld anymore. Most forums nowadays completely skip over the original Game Boy and just go right to the Game Boy Color version, which is fair, but I just wanted to showcase some classic titles that had their start on the original handheld. Anyways, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe if you like my content, and I will see you later.